2023. We're thrilled to have you join us today. A few helpful notes in case you've never attended an event on Crowdcast before. When it's time for a Q&A segment, please submit your questions using the Q&A feature, not the chat. Let's give it a minute or two for everyone to join the session. And as we're waiting, let me know in the chat where you're listening from today. Also, please let us know if this is your first time attending UCR Writers Week. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with our session.
Welcome to the 46th Writers Week at UCR. 46 years of incredible literary presence. We at UCR would like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air, the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Today, this meeting place is home to many Indigenous peoples from all over the world, including UCR faculty, students, and staff, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. Further, we offer acknowledgement to the Asian, Latino, and African American communities who have also built and tended to this city and its surroundings, oftentimes displaced and disenfranchised, despite their labor and commitment to the area. It is our third year online, and we couldn't be more thrilled than to offer captions and ASL interpreters throughout our sessions. And this year we have some on-campus, in-person events for those close enough to attend. We hope that you attend many events this week and spread the news that we are presenting these 33 writers free of charge to all. Pre-registration for virtual events is required, so spread the links as you spread the news. All of the books are available through UCR, Barnes & Noble, and Cellar Door Books online. Please support our authors by buying their books. And following each reading, please stick around for our live Q&A session. With no further ado, we welcome and greatly appreciate everyone here attending this 46th UCR Writers Week Festival. All of our writers presenting, all of our volunteer panel moderators, ASL presenters, and everyone who tunes into these recordings in the post-festival virtual continuum, and to everyone here attending now, welcome to the 46th UCR Writers Week Festival.
Hello and welcome to Writers Week. My name is Trinity Thompson, and I'm a first-year MFA student at UC Riverside. I'm pleased to be joined today by three amazing writers, Xochitl-Julisa Bermejo, David Campos, and Crystal A.C. Salas. Xochitl-Julisa Bermejo is the founder of Women Who Submit, a Los Angeles nonprofit helping women writers, and the author of Posada, Offerings of Witness and Refuge. We're also joined today by David Campos and Crystal A.C. Salas, who are both graduates of the UCR MFA program. Crystal A.C. Salas' book of poetry, Grief Logic, is a winner of the inaugural Alta California Chapbook Prize and Andrés Montoya Poetry Prize winner. Finally, David Campos is an American poet, writer, and producer of video poetry from California and Canto Mundo fellow. Campos' American Quasar, which has illustrations by Maceo Montoya, was published in 2021. Please join me in welcoming these writers.
Hello, my name is Xochitl-Julisa Bermejo, and I am very excited to be here with UCR's Writers Week. I am going to be reading poems from my forthcoming book, Incantation, Love Poems from Battlefield, coming in fall 2023 from Mouthfield Press. The first poem I'm going to read, it was published in this anthology, Poetry Unbound, 50 Poems to Open Your World by Padraig Otuma. I was really excited that he chose a poem for his podcast, Poetry Unbound, and then it got to be part of this anthology. This poem was written while I was in residency at the Gettysburg National Military Park. I got to spend about a month out there writing, living in a farmhouse. This was in September 2017. So this was just as Trump's presidency was ramping up. We were really beginning to see the racism and the awful language and violence that was coming with his presidency. This was also a time when there was a lot of just the beginnings of protests against monuments, Civil War monuments specifically. And I was living at a Civil War site that had over 1,000 monuments. So it was a very strange time. It was a very scary time, and it was a very alienating time. And this poem came from that experience. Battlegrounds. Gettysburg National Military Park. Motorcycles and white tour vans speed between behemoth granite shafts, shove my body by their force, leave me roadside and wandering fields. Little is funny when you're Chicana and walking a Civil War site not meant for walking. Regardless, I ask park rangers and guides for stories on Mexican soldiers. Receive shrugs. No evidence in statues or statistics. In the cemetery, not one Spanish name. I'm alone in the wine shop. It's the same in the post office, the market, the antique shop with the KKK books on display. In the peach orchard, I prepare a seance, sit cross-legged in grass, and hold a smoky quartz to the setting sun. I invite the unseen to speak. So many dead, it's said, Confederates were left to rot. In war, not all bodies are returned home, nor graves marked. I Google Mexicans in the Civil War and uncover layers to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and Cinco de Mayo. This is how I meet ancestors for the first time. Heroes this country decorates in clownish sombreros and fake mustaches, dishonors for fighting European empire on shared American land that power and money dictate can't be shared. Years before this, carrying water gallons up an Arizona mountain ridge to replenish supplies in a pass known as Dead Man's, I wrote messages on bottles to the living, scanned Sonoran canyons for the lost, and knew too many would not be found. A black Sharpie Virgen drawn on hot plastic became a prayer. May the next officer halt before cracking her face beneath his boot, spilling life onto dirt. No, nothing's funny when you're brown in a country you're taught isn't yours, you're dead, don't count. So at the end of that poem, I mentioned some time that I spent in the Arizona border with the group No More Deaths. My first book is a lot about that. I volunteered with this nonprofit organization, bringing water out to people crossing through the desert. And I was exploring the desert lands and thinking about the border and what it meant and what it looked like. In my new book, I wanted to kind of think about how some people grow up crossing the border all the time, and it's like a daily occurrence. And that is how I grew up. When I was a child, we would go to Tijuana all the time. We would go for Christmas shopping. We would go at the beginning of the school year to buy shoes. And also we would go down to buy inventory because my parents were always in some kind of scheme. They were always selling things, as many immigrant families do. At one point we had a flower shop, a burrito stand, we had a party balloon business. And so we would go to TJ to pick up these items. Another thing we used to do was we would sell things like cowboy hats and candies and bandanas at the Pico Rivera Sports Arena. So this was a concert venue, or still is a concert venue in Pico Rivera, El Monte, South San Gabriel Valley area. And this venue has seen Vicente Fernandez, has seen Tigres del Norte, Juan Gabriel. And when I was a kid, we used to go there on Saturdays and sell things to all the people coming to watch the shows. And so that's what this poem is about. To be a child of immigrants. You learn the hustle young while TGIF plays in the background, Tanner's in the kitchen, and you and your brother on a living room floor assembly line. Merchandise must be individually packaged. Slip metallic decals in the shape of cowboy hats into cellophane envelopes. Fold the flap, staple it shut. Stack multicolored bandanas by state: Durango, Jalisco, Chihuahua, Nayarit. Saturday morning, no time for cartoons. Wake early, pack the van. Saturday afternoon, display the inventory. Saturday evening, watch men in 501s, bandanas wagging from back pockets, dance with one leg propelling. Gritos bounce off Budweiser-soaked floors. Bodies move like broken. Crowds build like fire. Try your best to not be frightened. To sell what you can. Parrot your mother. The way she flirts with customers makes them laugh. Remember, your great-grandfather sold raspados in the church square with syrups made from scratch. Remember, your grandfather constructed a Huizache barbershop behind his Boyle Heights home, furnished with an authentic barber chair, white porcelain, and smooth. Remember, your father drove you on afternoon turnarounds to Tijuana for new stock in a brown Volkswagen van. Hot, beige vinyl stuck to your skin. Across the border, cousins manning a taco shop didn't speak your language. Skinned goats hung hooked from the kitchen ceiling. Pink chicle became payment for a day's work. And these last two were recently published in Huizache. I'm really proud to be a part of this magazine. The editor is now Maceo Montoya, and they have a new home at UC Davis. And so these poems, this first one is for Andrés Guardado. He was a young man who was shot by Compton police in August 2020. And his family says that he was working as a security guard, and the police dispute this because they say he wasn't old enough to legally be a security guard. As someone who's grown up in an immigrant family, I know that folks do whatever they need to do to survive, to make money, to get their foot in the door. And so when I read that, that really angered me, and I wanted to write about that. So this is for Andrés Guardado, and this is thinking about Andrés Guardado. This first part is from a police report. It has been reported that Mr. Guardado was employed or acting as a security guard at the location. Regarding that assertion, we have the following information to share. Mr. Guardado was not wearing a security uniform or clothing, nor wearing any type of gun belt. He was not yet 21 years old, therefore he was unable to legally employed as an armed security guard. There is no record of Mr. Guardado possessing a security license. Chris Marks, Commander, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, August 12, 2020. Andrés is my brother's name. His son Mando is 13. In 5 years, Mando will be the same age as Andrés when he was shot in the back by Compton cops. At 18, Mando will still be Andrés' son, still be my nephew, still be new and not yet a man. At 15, my dad was employed at a pharmacy. It was his first job in the States. He made deliveries like the kid in It's a Wonderful Life. Like George Bailey, my dad always had to be a man. Andrés is my brother. Andrés is my dad. Andrés is my dad's brothers too. My uncle has a 44-year-old silkscreen business, probably the oldest, longest owned silkscreen business by a Mexican immigrant in all Los Angeles, maybe even California, maybe even the US. Why not? Beyond rows and rows of dusty wooden framed screens, this story is the record. Starting in the 1970s, my uncle employed his dad until he died of lung cancer in 1994. Brothers, sons, nephews, and cousins from Mexico all worked at designing logos and pressing tees. They are Andrés too. Today, as women often do, his daughter does her best to order the front office. July 10th, 1999, my uncle asked if I wanted to earn extra money. 19 and home for the summer, a gray van I'd never seen before waited outside. Not knowing the job or the uniform, I threw on orange shorts and a ribbed, striped tank. Jumping in the van, I found his son driving and my uncle riding shotgun. On a shaded street in the perimeter of the Rose Bowl, I stood at a T in the road with shirt slung over a shoulder. I held one open to the oncoming cars so they could see the World Cup design. No licenses for logos, no permits to sell. When a cop rolled by, my cousin ordered me to drop the merchandise and drove us to a new spot. Is this illegal? Only a look for my dumb question. When I hadn't sold a thing, my uncle said to forget it. I handed over my stack and wandered across the green lawn to the Save Ferris concert. Bobbing my head to a song, my uncle strolled up with 2 scalp tickets and said, "Let's go." That's how I witnessed live the winning penalty kick and Brandi Chastain ripping off her uniform, bearing a black sports bra to the world. To my knowledge, no one died that day, though many did things we were told we were unable to do. And this last poem was written in July 2020, soon after George Floyd's murder, in the middle of protests and police curfews. It was a tumultuous time, as I know we all remember. Still kind of thinking about monuments, I had realized that I didn't need to go to someplace like Gettysburg to write about them. I lived in San Gabriel. I'm from San Gabriel, which is home to the San Gabriel Mission, which is a site of colonialism and rape and murder. I grew up going to that church, that school. I was baptized there. I had my quinceañera there. And so while all this was happening, I was thinking about how there was a monument in my own hometown that within a community I had been a part of. And I wanted to think about how I could dismantle that place. And I started writing a poem where I imagined ripping apart the walls. At that same exact time, someone actually lit the roof on fire, which burnt a lot of the church down. And I felt personally responsible because I had imagined this violence or some kind of violence like this. And so I reworked the poem to think about, I wanted to think about like not only dismantling, but how can I dismantle some monument of violence and use the pieces to make something new, something that is for growth and health. And that's what this poem is about. Love poem for LA, July 2020. 1. May this poem honor the tongue of a people. May morning steps with mom reclaim the corner of live oak and a street named for a conqueror I refuse space to, with bougainvillea's resolve to topple a wooden wall. May these lines relieve Toyperina of her post. 2. When alarms announce curfews and police attempt to stop the people's demands, Dad advises Mission Glass at Cesar Chavez for replacing a cracked windshield. But nothing delivers George Floyd safely home to his daughter, Gianna. San Gabriel's Mission's thatched roof catches fire at 4 a.m. testing structure, but nothing suffices. When a priest stamps ash to foreheads, he says, "Remember, you are dust." 3. Fire is renewal. Land cannot forget. Land is mother. Mother's womb is structure. Ash is not nothing. Futures are sketched in ash. 4. When the bells finally came down, their tongues were fat from centuries of wagging. Being lashed to ropes and forced to cry was not the life they dreamed when first molded. But now they sing as 262 copper hearts, one for every year the mission stood. The Indigenous Women's Monument, forged by Native craftspeople, sanctified art installation is dedicated by the people of the city of San Gabriel as a place for healing, reads the sign in 5 languages. Not far off, a pedestal remains from when the people voted against a criminal statue cursing their work. Girls from the high school Volunteers baptized green skirts, hauled the bronze to South El Monte, dumped it into the river marshes. Army of engineers ordered, let it drown. And blue herons, keep guard. Come, sit here, and listen to the women and their stories. Be touched by medicine. Thank you for having me. I'm Xochitl-Julisa Bermejo.
Hi, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for watching this video. I'm going to be reading excerpts from American Quasar, poems by me, and art by Maceo Montoya. So what you're going to be seeing on the screen here is the art by Maceo Montoya. They're on timers, so here's that first one. It'll go through for the next 15 minutes, and let's get started. The following poem opens up the entire collection. And to talk a little bit about how the poetry and the artwork in this particular collaboration is, when most people think about art and poetry, they think about ekphrastic poetry. They think about, poetry written after art. What we wanted to do as a part of this collaboration was kind of work simultaneously apart, but have a singular driving idea that kind of starts the process. And so what we started with was a line from my first book, which is Furious Dust, the one on that side, which was The Precipice of Violence. And when we thought about that line, we started creating work and we started sending each other poems, and he would send me art. And it was through that process that I think we began to really dig into the process of creation rather than the topics that we were writing about. And that's what became central to the controlling idea and theme within this collection and this collaboration. So much so that even though the poems changed drastically from revision to revision to revision, by the time the final product came to its existence, it still kind of melded really well with one another. And we'll start with American House Fire. In a house fire, you don't die from the flames. So don't mind the broken windows. I'm trying to let the smoke out. I have been for a long time running from room to room looking for an exit. But I would give for the chill of starlight, to believe in a just God who brings rain to temper the blaze ravaging my house. To feel for once what it's like to win. In victory, instinct orders our arms to rise toward the heavens. Some say this is what we're left with to remind us of God, to remind us to surrender. The smoke has stolen too many of our fathers. It's after our sons, and every door leads to another dead dream's room. Still they watch my house burn, smoke lifting its arms over the city. Only if they didn't cook with fire, they say. Only if their house had followed code. How many more doors will have to burn until it's yours? I'm running out of windows, and my arms are losing their strength. The sky darkens with victory, surrender. It's hard to tell anymore. But what's certain is, in a house fire, you die when you cry your child's name. This next one is titled American Boy, and it came from this somewhat like meditative exercise, writing exercise that I encountered. And I can't really quite pinpoint the exact experience, but I remember how I felt afterwards. It was something like we were closing our eyes and they're like, okay, imagine yourself in the perfect American, like you've lived and achieved the American dream. You know, what does your house look like? What does your yard look like? You know, what does the city that you live in look like? What do you look like? And when I envisioned that, I didn't think what I imagined was right. Like I felt like something's wrong here, and this short, brief poem called attention to that. American boy. I dream myself young, running to adore the sky's color. I'm white. Instead of myself, I wonder where all the blues went. They're not in the broken record player. The needle only plays songs of crushed bone. I want to call out the sky's real name, even though my tongue has been sanded down from years of hushing my own. And I can't shake the tongueless boy, knowing I will never grasp how to love myself in color. And so one of the things that you will realize, and hopefully maybe you can pick up by looking at some of the art here, is that one of the processes that Maceo enacted in the creating of this art is that instead of painting on these screen prints, he would put all the black ink down and carve really quickly, right, to expose the light, to expose those white spaces in order to create the art. And one of the more interesting things about it is that sometimes he would use that same, I forget the actual term, the same kind of the screen that he would use from one image to another. And so sometimes he would get like this ghost-like image. And I was like, that would be a very interesting thing to try to copy within the collection. And so I started to think about, okay, if there are different versions of this, what would be a different version of American Boy, right? What would be its alternate? What would be its conclusion, if you will? And so this is American Boy 2. I've stopped dreaming. Thankfully, I have opened my eyes. I am color. I am sure everything is a box of crayons. The blues lives here, inside this body of drums. The needle is my tongue. I remember my name and want to call it out, that beautiful color, the one that hid between vineyard and whiskey for years. I'm overwhelmed with vowels, their hues. I lick my fingers, my lips. The sky adores me. This kind of revelation happened because of, I was thinking of the Bible around the same time, right? And more in a literary way than most folks. Not most folks, than some folks would, right? I was really thinking about what the apocalypse, at least its definition, really means. And so this following short poem comes right before it, and I was really kind of interested in what all of that kind of related to the revelation of that particular poem for me through the process that I was working and collaborating with Maceo. Even knowing its history. Even still, I dream the sun cresting, its light removing the shadows, the frost, to reveal what's left of the blossoms, to mourn what's died, what will die. I've stopped thinking about you. This is about me. Why am I so afraid of the sunrise? The apocalypse doesn't have to be violent. The horsemen are mirrors. And somewhere along the way, I became really fascinated with stars, right? And cosmology and all of these different aspects of space. Just like so many other poets before me, the collection is split up into two different sections, two big chapters, which I equally identify as like two centers of gravity, two black holes that exist that are somehow colliding to create this supermassive black hole, which becomes the quasar itself. And so this one is how an American boy becomes an astronomer. He listens to his father groan, then laugh, then cry, then silently leave him without the blues to carry him, to crack him open and spill his insides all over a dance floor. He casts a resurrection spell without language. The whole body is a mouth. He convinces himself he's done the math, like Mrs. Hall taught in 3rd grade. Remember to carry the remainders. He's charted it out on graph paper, like in Mr. Borjas's algebra class. Though numbers cannot figure out all the dark matter in his father's eyes, his heart, the center of his galaxy, and what happens after death, what happens when someone disappears into star matter. And we talked a lot about the editing process on Facebook of all places. I posted the editing process to the following poem, which started as like this 2-page long line poem that ended into 3 stanzas, 3 tercets, right? A small edited bunch. And you can see the process of me going through that and that particular kind of sequence of photos that I published there. I need to talk about this particular image here for 1 second. The first time I went up there and met Maceo, and he's just like, which one of these is your favorite? And I was like, I really love this one. And he's just like, that's great, because that's you. And I was just like, oh, wow, okay. I had no idea that he had created a portrait of me, and that was it. Anyways, so I'll close out with this one. Years later, I've telescoped the light of myself. The body speaks in star language. It's music on the verge of supernova. But I'm learning to touch from the stars, those who've suffered the Big Bang. Each night, a lesson on how life happens. Now, each touch of the body, a reach into potential grief. Each curve, a signal from the undiscovered dark. Thank you so much for allowing me this space to share these poems and this art with you all.
Thank you so much for having me. Wonderful UCR community. It is such an honor to be back. I'm reading from my book, my first book, Grief Logic, published winner of the Alta California Prize, which was a bilingual poetry prize. I was so grateful and lucky to have my book published in a bilingual edition in English and Spanish. And it was published by Gunpowder Press in Santa Barbara, which has been an amazing experience. And for anybody, any of my fellow alum and fellow current UCR students, if you ever have any questions about that contest, I'm so happy to be a resource to you. I wrote all of these poems during my time at UCR. And in my third week of school and in my first year in the MFA program, my abuelito passed away very suddenly. And over the 3 years I was in the program, I would go through a bunch of other tragedies. I lost another dear family member. My tío was like a father to me. I almost lost my abuelita. And I was diagnosed with cancer, and I'm in remission now, thankfully. But I went through all of that in the time that I was at UCR. I bring all of that up at the front, all of this heaviness, to say that I don't know how I would have survived all of that had I not had the support of the program to stay in school and stay the course and stay writing. And these poems came from that time, and I'm really grateful to be able to share them with you today. I'll read the first one in its Spanish and English form. La primera noche de nadie. Fui a Joshua Tree. El anochecer nunca tan claro en sus puntas. Pensé que podía inclinar mi cabeza hacia atrás lo suficiente para ver mi finimiento, acunado en el cinturón del ulión, adecuado en la osa mayor, suficiente para beber. Exhale, inhale, mi propia nebulosa. No sé dónde está Dios, pero yo creí en ti, no como un Dios, solo un camino de polvo a un rastreable, pero las estrellas robaron el mapa directamente de mi boca. And here it is in English. The first night of no one. I went to Joshua Tree, the nightfall never so clear on its points. Thought I could drop my head back enough to see my own pretending, cradled in Orion's belt, cupped in Big Dipper, enough for me to drink, exhaled, inhaled my own nebula. I don't know where God is, but I believed in you. Not like a God, just a dust road still traceable. But the stars stole the map right out of my mouth. This next poem is called Living Room. When my 6-year-old cousins ask me, where is he? I tried to define everything about a God you didn't believe in until the hospital slipped out. You begged, Mommy, Mommy, are you there? Took communion from the priest the next time. His voice filled the room. I can't hold it against you. There are times I sink into a spilled drink of my own grieving, stucco beside my bed, becoming chalk, becoming scratch, phosphor, chalk, everything suddenly. No me importa. I don't know where life is because breaths seem to come like the lottery we watched get called out and go unclaimed day after day, the week after your death, which was spent trying to make sure your love was still eating. Condolence, gorditas, and turning off the World Series to pray, the rosary, only to switch it back once the silence of living room twined made us sweat. I help M and S write homework sentences on the soft cobija. The other room, they ask, could we write you a letter? I try to define everything about a God I don't talk to, but I pretend for long enough to sit next to your love, who never got to say goodbye. What kind of God cuts a telephone line like that to such a well-paying customer? I learned to pray the rosary in Spanish, even though I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know how else to keep the living room from collapsing. Salas means living rooms, plural, and we have cinder blocked into many salas, some littered with used tissues, hived skin, others roped off, velvet laced, dusty doilies. I don't know where God is, but I pretend to know your forwarding address. My cousins ask me about the letter. I tell them you can't write back because your mailbox is now everywhere. Like when they're on the playground feeling lonely or feeling weird on the bus, they accept this logic from me, ask me to retell it. And you, I say yes to this forming of a room, and yes to watching the daily misa on closed circuit television weeknights at 5 p.m. with your love, and yes to believing in birds, wind, phantom doors, shaking bed frames for everyone who needs me to say, I see it. Yes, I see it too. This next poem is called Elegía Poética. And I just want to I have so much gratitude for all of my professors who helped me through UCR and encouraged me, and all of my peers, my fellow writers, dear friends for life who sent, whose attentive reading really just pushed my work in a way that I don't think it would have gone if not in this opportunity. But I want to give special thanks to Michael Jaime, my profe, who gave me the idea for this title, Elegía Poética. I originally wanted to say it was an ars poética, and he gave me the idea to play on the word of the Spanish word elegía, which is, can be autobiography, but it can also be elegy. And that seems really appropriate for this poem. So thank you. Elegía Poética. I was not born into the arms of my mother. I could breathe, but I couldn't digest. I breathed for less than an hour before a machine had to do it for me. I was born into the silence around my possible death. In the waiting room, my first cry belonged to my abuelita. When no one told her anything, this absence became words, then sentences. ¿Dónde? Mi nieta. Dios. Diosito. ¿Por qué? According to my mother, my abuelita became a puddle that no one could clean up. My abuelita's name is Clara. Mine is Crystal, Cristal. My parents said they named me after Billy Joel's saxophonist, or a pretty rock. I lived, and the year my sister was born, our uncle died. Once that year, my abuelita says she was helping my father bathe us, and I began to cry. She had to leave the bathroom because I had become her dead son, fresh and small, with his soul split by a scraped knee. I lived, and my abuelito, an atheist, saved my melted baptismal candles in a paper envelope. I lived, and every time I thought I would die, my child's soul split by a scraped knee. My abuelito held me on the plastic-covered couch, even though his arms were stiffened from labor and a discomfort with being touched. My abuelito called us his reinas and introduced us to other royalty, Iscoto, Bacal, Siqueiros, Calo, Rivera, Neruda, Fuentes, Marquez, Paz. My abuelito would introduce me as mi poeta, mi poeta, mi poeta. Some days the world won't call me that name to my face. Kind, nurturing, teacher, but rarely poet. The world wouldn't call my abuelito a scholar, immigrant, worker, unskilled, but rarely scholar. So he hoarded books in the barren field he was given. He talked sweetly to birds, had an orange finch named Pavarotti who spent his days in front of a tiny mirror. He told me some birds get their food from puddles on the ground, but some birds can have the whole damn sky from which everything comes, mija. I want you to eat from the sky, he said to me. Nunca mueres, he would say. When his breath became a machine, I became a puddle on the floor of the ICU. My father asked me to clean it up. My father never learned how to swim. He couldn't go to the city pool. Instead, he blinks 1,000 times for every word he can't say. Every time someone I love dies, I'm reborn into a world I do not know and do not want to live in. In the hospital lobby, when I told my abuelita, I knelt at her feet and became the sea. I tread and tread until I felt the ridge of a different continent under her strengthening hands. She lived. I lived. This poem exists in dual language format, thanks to my wonderful translator and editor and founder of the contest, Andrés, who is the poet laureate of Santa Barbara, the poet queen of Santa Barbara. There's a lot of code switching due to my background with Spanish, but also just because some things my abuelita said, some of these things are straight from her mouth, and she's a better poet than I could ever be. So some of these lines are exactly what she said. Every line in Spanish is exactly what she said to me. Ha pasado un año, de Clarita Bustos Salas. Quiero recordar todos los recuerdos y paseos que tuve con mi esposo. I want to sit and write them all by hand. En mi vida, mi esposo me decía, Clarita, ¿quieres esto? Clarita, vamos para allá. Clarita, siempre con mucho cariño. How he would talk to me, and this I remember well. No quiero vivir en un panteón. Sometimes I pull books off his shelves. I thought I had read every Poniatowska, but found something new last week. Y mira, a veces lo leo y lo abrazo a mi pecho. Please, don't buy me orquídeas with the flowers florecidas anymore. I know they are enchanting, caras abiertas, ready to be looked at, but the stems with the closed buds, viven más. We have two more. Proof logic number 2. When Serafin died, the aire in the living room went out, remember? And it was the same when Mike left. That morning, the fridge rattled out of warranty. Too young, just like him, melted from the inside, the first hot day of summer. I tried to save us. The gallina y carne, pulled from the freezer at least, in tailgate coolers, borrowed from Theo's garage, the edges of the ice rounding, even as I scooped it out with my bare hands, burning, raw, dripping. I tried my best to preserve what we had saved, pero no sirve. The warming earth did not stop for me. This is my last poem. I wrote it in our visiting professor, Morgan Parker's voice class and try to imagine what my abuelito would have said to the pandemic, because he didn't make it to that point. And I always just kind of found myself worrying about him, even though he wasn't with us. And I wondered if other people felt that way about people they had lost recently or at all, because it was such a momentous, catastrophic time. We all agree to hear your laugh in the air at the news of the toilet paper shortage. On Channel 4, our city, where there is suddenly no Charmin, no Kirkland, no Purell, si Vaporu, no Crystal Geyser in gallons, only Arrowhead, the last water on earth that tastes like dirt. Ay caray, you would say, as you try to leave the house, to see your friends at the grocery checkouts, the Trader Joe's, the Vons, the Food for Less for California garlic. Ito, no, los viejitos tienen que quedarse en la casa. I worry about you being out there in the public air. You're not even here. You were so alive the day you died, viejito. Today, Michelangelo is at the Getty, and no one can see him, even with all their extra time, or your favorite Rembrandt at LACMA, torn down under construction since you left anyway. Yes, I am home from school, reading and watching too many pendejadas on Netflix, but staying inside, only leaving to deliver groceries to Ita and Lisabeth, all of us with immune systems que sufriendo since you left, more vulnerable than ever. But we keep each other, and some of us keep God. You might have patriarched in overdrive, buying our groceries, or maybe you would have disappeared hours in the cave of your records, compliant in meditation with sus canciones. It's hard to say where we would be now. Hard to know where any of us would be without this enfermedad en el aire. Today, the air quality in Los Angeles is the cleanest in the world, even over your barrio, where the city forgets your neighbors, who are now called essential, still going to work, so everyone else can stay at home. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Kyrie Owen, and I'm here to moderate today's Q&A session. Thank you so much to all the authors who read today, and I'm pleased to welcome them back to the stage. Xochitl-Julisa Bermejo, David Campos, and Crystal A.C. Salas. Great. Welcome all. I want to make sure that you all get the chance to get to know each other and our audience. So audience, please submit all your questions into our Q&A section, not the chat, so we can see and upvote questions that we want. We're going to make sure that we can get to as many questions as possible today in the time that we have. To get us started, I would love to hear from our writers what got you started at writing. So Xochitl, would you like to start us off?
Hi, thank you for having me. So what got me started in writing? I always say my origin story is that I wrote my first poem at, I think I was 7 or 8. I had gotten a notebook for a birthday present, and there was like a motif in the notebook with shooting stars. And that prompted me to write a poem about shooting stars. And I got really excited because it was the first time I realized I could rhyme. So I was writing light with bright and night. And that was really exciting for me. So that's where it all started. And I love sound in poetry. That's one of my favorite things about poetry. It's the sounds of words and alliteration. And then then in high school, I would kind of keep a journal because I wanted to be like the cool girls who had like painted their docs and had their journals that they carried with them all the time. And they were in like English honors class, which I never was.
So I was trying to be like them, and I would carry my journal around, but I would like barely write, and it would always be like sappy poems about unrequited love. And then it wasn't until I was in my late 20s, I was teaching high school full time, and I just felt like I didn't know enough yet. Like I just felt like still very new, and I have a BA in theater, and so that was the point where I was just like, well, if I ever want to be a writer, I have to do it now. And I took a community college class and kind of built up a portfolio out of that class, and I applied to an MFA program. So that's how I got started. Sound and trying to be cool.
I'm sure we can all relate to that. I love that. Thank you. David, would you like to speak on that?
Yeah, so for me, it was really, I got started with editing. So I took forensic speech and debate in my senior year in high school. And one of the things that came across my desk, right, was just like this opportunity to really develop and edit down an entire book into 10 minutes. And I really love the editing process. Even now, today, I rather edit and revise my own work, right, than actually generate work. And it was in that process I was editing down Richard Pryor's one of his autobiography, Richard Pryor and Other Life Sentences. I was also looking up a lot about how to write jokes because in it there's a lot of jokes, and so I started to write my own kind of narrative jokes, and that's kind of where it started for me. Was in that competitive speech and debate class and going to the writing center in my high school and joining a poetry competition, and I was just like, hey, I can do this. I really enjoy doing this, and that's where it started for me.
Amazing. Thank you. And Crystal, how did you start off as a writer?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kyrie, for that question, and David and Xochitl-Julisa for those stories. Before I knew how to write as a very small child, my dad's a painter and a musician. I was raised by a musician. Everyone in that side of the family is an artist in some way, and he would just make me little notebooks made out of scrap paper and print them together in little booklets and say like, Mija, write or draw. I would draw pictures. I would draw story pictures. And then as I learned, sorry, my cats have chosen to fight at this exact moment, so apologies if you can hear that. So as I learned to actually write as a way to express myself, I have this very strong memory of him taking me out for ice cream, and he's like, we're going for ice cream, and then he pulls over and on our way, and he like brings out a notebook, like a real notebook, and he's like, okay, so we're gonna pull over, you need to write for like 20 minutes. And I was probably like 8 years old, and I was like, well, I didn't really sign up for that. Like I wanted to go to Baskin Robbins or whatever. And he's like, yeah, we can, but you have to write for 20 minutes, even if it's, I'm bored and I hate this. And I sat and I did that. And finally I realized I was tired of myself saying I'm bored and I hate this. And I said something and I really loved it. And I got a lot of encouragement from teachers as I grew up, and times where I was kind of a poet in secret, my teachers would pull me out of it, and really grateful for that. So it kept a life of writing alive for me.
Amazing. Thank you, Crystal. Sarah Fowler asks, can you introduce us to a spirit of your desk who emboldens or supports your poems? Thinking about this, I almost wonder if this is something like your guitar, Crystal. Like, would that be a spirit of your desk that emboldens your writing?
Oh yeah, actually it very much is. This guitar I've played from a very young age. I'm not very good, but it is a space. I really like inhabiting artistic spaces where I'm not very skilled at the art, and it gives me a freedom instead of being so perfectionist in my head about something that I've been told I'm good at, right? And this guitar actually belongs to my Tío Mando, who passed away when I was 4. He's referenced in one of the poems, and it was inherited by me. So it's with me.
It's beautiful. I love the idea of like an inherited spirit. So Xochitl-Julisa, do you have a spirit of your desk that you can relate to as well?
A spirit of my desk. Well, there's a spirit that's always with me when I write, and that's my grandmother. I have a photo of me as a toddler, and she's holding me. And I've taken it to, when I go away to writing residencies, I take it with me. She's always in my poems, and I can see her from where I sit and write. I can see that photo. So, yeah, she's in everything, and that's who I'm in conversation with a lot of times when I'm writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this idea of just family. It seems like it's coming up a lot in all of your writings. I love that. And David, do you have a spirit as well that guides your writing?
I was looking around, right? Like I'm surrounded by books right now, and I'm trying to pick one particular book, but I have so many. One that I'm reading right now, right, is this one. You sound like a white girl: The Case for Rejecting Assimilation, and I think the spirit that lives within my desk that really helps me generate work and really pushes me to think about new ideas is everyone who I'm reading in that moment.
Yeah.
So that's where it is.
Absolutely. I love the idea of just using books as inspiration for that. That's great. Thank you. This question is for Xochitl-Julisa, sorry. I hope you have time to tell us about Women Who Submit.
Yeah, sure. So, Women Who Submit was founded in 2011, and it's for women identifying and non-binary writers. And the origin of that was that there's an organization called VITA, Women in Literary Arts. They had a different name at that time. And in 2009, they created a study, and they were taking top journals and opening up to their contributors pages and counting how many men were being published in the journals and also how many women, and then looking at the differences in those numbers. So they were looking at the New Yorker, the Atlantic, the Nation, magazines like that. And what they found was there was a huge disparity in representation for women writers and also books by women writers being reviewed. And so they put out a report, and there was this quantitative evidence of this, though it's like, I think many of us already knew that was happening. We did, but there was now quantitative evidence, and they just started asking those editors why they felt those numbers were so disparate. And the most common reply was that women don't submit as often as men and don't resubmit as aggressively as men. And so our co-founder, Alice Dixon, she was working with Vita. She had this idea that it was like, what if we create a co-working space where everyone comes together, brings their computers, brings their open calls, brings their resources, brings their journals, because the journal always says, hey, please read our journal before you submit, which can be very expensive because journals are the same price as books. So we always share all that stuff, and then we come together in a living room or someone's kitchen, and we submit together. And the idea was that if we do it together, will it make it easier for people? We get more work out there and hopefully change that messaging of that, the women aren't doing it as much. So over 10 years later now, we're a nonprofit, and we're serving, women identifying with non-binary writers, and we have chapters across the country. So wherever you are, there's also one in France. So wherever you are, you may be able to find Women Who Submit near you. And you can go to our website, womenwhosubmitlit.org. And yeah, we just always have a lot of programming. We have anthologies now. We're going to be at AWP. We're going to do a happy hour at AWP, all kinds of stuff, just ways for folks to come together and support each other. And it's really about getting your work out there and then celebrating all the parts of submitting. So the submission, we clap for you. You did it. You sent it out. Way to go. When you get rejected, we clap for you. Way to go. You got rejected. You did the work. When you get accepted, we cheer for you. So it's like the whole it's about the process. And thanks for letting me share that.
Incredible. It's such an honor to be able to hold this space with you. I've loved Women Who Submit so much. So thank you for sharing. Tom Lutz also has a question for everyone, saying, you all have deep experience in the Inland Empire. How has this affected your work? David, would you like to start us off?
I would say at least a lot more in my first book than in my second book. Um, some of the landscapes and poems really came from just living in Riverside. I think one of the things about UCR is that it's a big commuter school. But I had the opportunity to live like right next door to campus, and so I did a lot of hiking. I did a lot of walking, and I went and visited a lot of the local kind of cities next to like Moreno Valley, right over there in Redlands and San Bernardino, all that kind of like larger area. And it reminded me, and if you've ever visited Fresno and the Clovis area where I'm from, they look very similar, right? But they have very distinct different cultures. And so you get to see that blend of those cultures and that blend of that landscape more specifically in that first book than in the second book.
Amazing. Thank you, David. Crystal, would you like to talk about the way place is impacted in your writing?
Yeah, shout out to the IE, which I had never spent too much time in prior to coming to UCR. I had the gift of before my abuelito passed away, he actually set me up with his little brother, and who lives in Jurupa Valley, and so I stayed with him and my tia during the week when I was going to school, and it so I didn't have to commute every single day, but it was a gift to sometimes. I'm sure a lot of people who've experienced loss can relate to this. When you are in the place in which you have lost, you have so much memory. You're like every single intersection is like can be a trigger point, and it can be just being confronted. It's like very painful, and so to drive out into the openness of the IE, just more open in physical space, but also emotional and mental space. It was really freeing for me to be out there in like a different sort of environment and climate, and to see the snowy mountains and to get to know my Theo as well, and get to know the community of Riverside. So I'm very, very grateful.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you for sharing, Crystal. It's so true about the way that plays can impact your not only like psyche and just your experience in grief, but also your writing too. And Xochitl-Julisa, would you like to speak on place in the Inland Empire? In your writing?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with the Inland Empire. I'm from the San Gabriel Valley, so my first book, I wrote a lot about LA and the Arizona-Mexico border. And then I think in this book, I try to think more about home, my real home where I grew up. And I think it's also because like a lot of it was written during like lockdowns, and you just had, your only option was just to walk around the blocks of your neighborhood. So yeah, I write a lot about the San Gabriel Valley, and flowers. A lot about like just walking around and noticing flowers and blooms and change.
Yes, I love that. Like the environment itself, like the plants and life that grows within the place that you're writing about. Absolutely gorgeous. All right. And the next question will be during writer's block, what is a mantra or source of motivation that sees you through? Crystal, would you like to start?
Yeah, that has changed over my life. And something I can share more recently is I've opened up a sort of regular journaling practice, which seems pretty obvious, but for me, it was something I hadn't really journaled in a long time because, again, like the perfectionism of if I sit down and write something, it has to be like, there has to be some sort of progress. It has to wow me. There has to be some sort of some point, and recently I've just been journaling every day, just like
it's just like it's nothing to report home about. It's very boring. It's sometimes a list of things I saw or like dumb thoughts I had, and it's taken the pressure off, which has actually really helped with my writer's block. For me, writer's block often builds up because of like a pressure to be something, and it takes it off. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Crystal. David, would you like to speak on this?
For writer's block, I really like this idea, that talks about the spirit of duende, right? I mean, one video that I constantly refer my composition students to is that TED Talk by Elizabeth Gilbert, right? About like the spirit flowing through you and whether you catch the moment or not. She even touches on it briefly in a newer book about that writing process. Um, and I find that process really works for me. So for me, it's all about just sitting down and getting started and allowing myself to be like, hey, this work is not going to be great, but I'm forgiving myself because I made it here to this desk. I am writing, I am generating stuff, and whether that spirit is here with me, that's great. If not, may it bless somebody else.
Amazing. Thank you. And Xochitl-Julisa, would you like to speak on this?
Sure. I think I'm kind of maybe like a mix of Crystal and David. I think practice is big, like a regular practice. So for again, like going back to walking has been a big part of my writing. Just like walking around my neighborhood and really literally like I get obsessed with like sidewalk flowers. Just walking around and being in my body. That's a lot about my writing. I'm very experiential. So like feeling the weather and being in my body and looking at something beautiful and hearing the birds. And so like that gets things moving. And then making sure to have like a practice of certain hours where I just sit at my desk. Whenever it's most hard, that's when I have to make sure that like, yes, from 10 to 12, I'm going to sit there and maybe I just stare at the wall and maybe I write like for 15 minutes, but that needs to happen. And then you notice that like you do a regular practice, little by little, things start happening and it gets like easier and you start having words on the page and you're like, oh, maybe I have something. So.
Fabulous. Thank you all for this amazing advice. I know that everyone will feel so inspired and grateful for your comments. Thank you. All right, I'd love to welcome Trinity back to the stage.
Thank you. And thank you to our writers and our moderator for that wonderful Q&A session. We hope you've enjoyed our time with us today. As you know, our goal is to keep Writers Week 100% free to attend. We couldn't do that without the generosity of all our donors. So if you got something of value out of today's session, we certainly hope you did. And you'd like to make a gift to show your gratitude, you can do so by clicking on the button at the bottom of your screen. It says make a gift to support Writers Week. Gifts of all sizes are appreciated and everything given will help to support our next Writers Week festival. Thank you again for joining us and we hope to see you in the next session.